a new Time Magazine interview with Donald Trump. We wanted to read through this thing and check out what he said, if there's really anything worth talking about. I think there are a few things, but this is also kind of a classic rambly Trump interview.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that came out of it, either we've heard before or are completely wishy-washy, or we have serious reason not to believe it.
Let's one area where I want to start right away, very high level, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Trump is a very, very hard to read guy.
Oh, yeah.
He talks out of two sides of his mouth, and he does a really good job of saying a lot while actually saying nothing.
Yes.
I want to give one example in relation to his policy towards mifepristone in this interview.
Mm-hmm.
The interviewer asks him pretty much point blank, "What's your opinion on mifepristone? Do you support it? Should it be federally regulated? Blah, blah, blah." And he goes, "I have very strong feelings about that. I have a lot of strong feelings about that. I have a great policy." And you'll know it in 2 weeks.
Yes.
14 days. Well, he says that about everything that he's not comfortable taking a stance on. Another really good example is before the 2020 election.
Well, I just want to point out on this mifepristone point, what's hilarious is the interview that was published is an initial interview and then a follow-up call that happened 2 weeks later. So after the entire portion of time over which he said he would be coming out with an announcement on the policy, he didn't do it and repeated the same line in the follow-up.
Yeah. It's classic Trump.
Yes.
In 2020, he had an interview with Chris Wallace a month before the election.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris Wallace asked him, "What's your healthcare policy? Like, what's your alternative to what we've been doing with Obamacare?"
Yep.
And he's like, "We're going to have it for you within 2 weeks."
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's 4 years later, and I'm still waiting, Donald.
Yep.
You know, so this is very, very classic Trump interview style.
Mm-hmm.
So that's him on mifepristone. He has other abortion takes in here that I think it's showing how little he wants to take a position.
Yeah.
But by not taking a position, it actually makes him seem very extreme in some cases.
I guess so. So, well, the line he's trying to toe is we're leaving it to the states.
Mm-hmm.
Point blank. That's all that you need to know. Different states are going to do different things. One of the questions is, would you support states monitoring women's pregnancy statuses to enforce their abortion bans?
Let's stop for a second. That's insane. Let's sit in that. The question was, would you accept or allow states to monitor women on their pregnancy status, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what was his response?
He said, "Yeah, I think states should be able to do that." I'm going to look for the exact wording for a second here.
Yes. Because that's really important there. Like, that's a very extreme ask. And I think we should know from our possible future president what the federal government would do in that circumstance.
He said, "I think they might do that. Again, you'll have to speak to the individual states."
So his ideology, leave it to the states mindset, is really going to allow the states to run roughshod and do whatever they want.
Yes. But and that's assuming only that he does just completely leave it up to the states.
Right. That's assuming
it's
at
his word. In this interview, the interviewer also tried to press him on if a bill came to your desk and it was for a federal abortion ban, would you veto it? And he never commits to vetoing it. Instead, he says, that's never going to happen, so I don't need to make a commitment because it would need 60 votes in the Senate, and you're never going to get that. So to me, that's where you're trying to read between the Trump lines a little bit, right? And you're like, okay, if you're not going to commit to this and you're just saying it's never going to happen, does that mean that when you get into office, even though you're saying you're going to leave it to the states, you're actually going to go further than that?
Right.
Because you want to take the agenda further, and you're actually just saying you're going to leave it to the states to get more votes come November?
Like, it's almost like, Trump, what do you believe? Yep. Like, if it was up to you, if you had 100 seats in the Senate, would you pass abortion? Like, we're not asking about the practicality or the pragmatism or the politics. We want to know your policy. How do you feel about it?
And he doesn't want to have a policy.
Right.
Because he doesn't want to get pinned down on a policy. It's funny because not only does he not want to have a policy, he doesn't want to express his personal opinions because it also talks about the Florida ballot referendum that's going to come up on abortion this fall and how Trump's a Florida resident. And the interviewer asks him, how are you going to vote on it? And he's like, I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to vote. I never tell people how I'm going to vote.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So again, and that's kind of the theme of the interview. He's very kind of wormy. He kind of slithers his way out of most of these questions. Another good example is he's asked about the Middle East, he's asked about what he would do to, or how he would stop the Israel war with Gaza. And he doesn't give any reason. He just says, I would stop it. It would be over once I was in office. I promise you that. And he says the same thing about the Ukraine war. Like, I would make one call to Putin and he would be out of Ukraine, just like that. Which is pretty funny to me.
It's so good. It's so good.
It's ridiculous. The big thing, of course, the first thing the interviewer starts with is immigration. Mm-hmm. And Trump reiterates that he's going to deport millions. He actually refers to Dwight Eisenhower, who deported about 13 to 14 million Mexican illegal immigrants during his term. And racism against Mexicans was rampant at the time. And he like credits Eisenhower, and he says we're going to kind of need to do the same thing here because we just have so many illegals. He, of course, exaggerates the number that there are. And he says, and this is where it gets important to me, I think. He says they would start with the National Guard, and that's kind of a line that he feels no discomfort in going up to,
which is already a lot. But
it is already a lot.
That's like that's where he's been playing it safe for the past couple months with his rhetoric anyway.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and that is legal.
Yeah,
using the National Guard to go after criminals technically is legal. But then he said if the National Guard wasn't enough, he would upgrade to deploying the military. And this is where it gets scary. And the interviewer specifically says it's illegal to deploy the military against civilian targets. And he says, well, I don't really consider them civilians because they're illegal. I need to be clear. Civilians is a term for non-military personnel. Mm-hmm. It does not matter that they're illegal immigrants. It wouldn't matter to deploy them against even a homicide murderer in the U.S., much less a white-collar crime perpetrator. Right? So he's not even backing down from saying, yeah, no, I would deploy the military against them.
And like that, what that reads to me is, it takes me two ways here. First, it reads me as, holy shit, that guy's insane. But then it also reads me to like, he probably doesn't know the legal distinctions justifying his military usage.
Maybe.
But actually, the way that he calls them non-civilians leads me to believe he might understand the legal ramifications. Because by not calling them civilians, if he's already making that distinction, he's saying, no, these illegal immigrants are no longer civilians. He's giving himself legal cover in the future.
I suppose,
guess that's what he's pushing for,
but
right?
it's like well established that
they
non-military personnel are civilians.
Yes.
So I guess he's saying it because there are going to be some people that just hear him say it and agree with him, but it wouldn't hold up in court, right? And the interviewer specifically gives him the act. It's the Posse Comitatus Act says you can't deploy the U.S. military against civilians, and he says, well, these aren't civilians. So like it is a little. That's where it gets scary. That's where it's like a lot of this interview is. He says he's not going to go that far, and I don't know whether to believe him because it's in his political best interest to say he's not going to go that far. So at the points where he is saying, I would go that far, that's where I'm scared.
Right.
Another part of that is saying he wanted to give police immunity from prosecution because he's saying that progressives and liberals are prosecuting the police so much that it's making the police lose their pensions and their families, even when they're doing nothing wrong, which
is not happening.
Is not true because the justice system is treating police fairly, and the police who do bad things are being treated fairly, and as they should be.
A lot of the police have qualified immunity in their union negotiation contracts that gives them a lot of immunity anyway, which shouldn't be allowed, but that's a whole other thing. So he wants to give blanket protection from prosecution. Now, the thing at this is he doesn't really have the power to do it blanketly.
No.
He can only say my Department of Justice won't do it.
Yes.
But, attorney generals across the states can still do it for statewide crimes.
Yeah. And
right?
civilians
and
who
civilians
are mistreated by the police.
They can still press charges.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Trump doesn't have the authority to do that unless he passed a new law.
Yes, which also wouldn't happen if the Democrats had any amount of power in Congress. But again, the fact that this is something he's publicly putting out there, this isn't one of those that he's even obfuscating.
Right.
He's just planting this flag.
Right. He's like, this is a bullet point on my list of things that I would like to do.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And not good. On the economy, he talked about tariffs. We've talked about this before, but he says 10% on everything, 60% on China, 100% on cars. The interviewer specifically asks, most economists say that tariffs increase inflation. They increase prices. what do you think about that? And Trump says, no, I don't agree with that. I think it's a charge on the other countries and not on us, not on our customers.
Wait,
and
that's
so
not
the guy, the interviewer specifically asks, so you really don't think these costs are passed on to consumers? And he says, no, I don't think that.
Okay, this guy's got no idea how anything works.
Or just lying, right?
Or lying, right? It has to be one or the other with that, right? It's got to be like it's statements like that just don't make sense to me, because he's been going off about this tariff thing for a while, and I don't know. We know how this works. We've done videos about this. Economists, it's not like a hotly debated topic, right? It's like, oh no, of course it costs more money to the American consumer, but it can be an expansionist economic policy in some circumstances, right? But the truth is, it will raise inflation, period. It will increase costs for consumers.
Yes.
End of story. That's what it will do.
And this is one of those things. So one of the positives that I took away from this is something that Trump is praised for all the time is running the country like a business. And people like that he's negotiating on behalf of the United States, that he's kind of playing hardball with these other countries. A good example of this is when he says that he won't protect NATO countries that don't pay their fair share. We were up in arms about that. We don't, and I think kind of rightfully so. It really does put the alliance at more risk, because it makes the NATO alliance's enemies think that they can attack countries more freely within the alliance.
That there's cracks within it, that they're not going to be as protected if the United States isn't there to back them up.
However, Trump also threatened to withdraw or to not protect NATO allies during his presidency that didn't pay up fully. And the Secretary General, Jens Stoltenberg of NATO, specifically came to the U.S. and credited Trump, and I read these quotes, credited Trump with encouraging these countries to pour about $100 billion more overall into their defense. And so that's a place where, hey, Russia hadn't invaded they still haven't invaded a NATO country yet, and he did encourage countries to spend more on their defense, which is going to make the alliance more powerful. The reason I'm jumping to that now is because you could imagine him doing the same thing with tariffs, talking a big game so that there's a serious idea that he'll walk away in any kind of trade negotiations with another country. Or by walking away, I mean he will actually impose the tariffs that he's threatening, even though they seem insane and seem like they will harm the American consumer. The difference, of course, is Trump did impose these tariffs that harmed the American consumer when he was president. So even though this could be a good negotiating tactic, I would also be extremely worried that it's going to be a bad policy rather than just a good negotiating tactic.
I'm going to push back a little bit on the NATO Secretary General thanking Trump for the 2% thing, because that could also just be bluster on the Secretary General's part to make him feel better and to try to make him feel like he
should stay in NATO.
Yes, like that can go both ways there.
True.
Right. So I don't know which one is actually the case.
That is actually a very good point, because I cannot imagine someone who would respond better to public praise
than
from
Trump,
an official guy.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay.
I'm going to mention two more things.
Yep.
One is the Middle East. Trump is asked about what he'll do about the war in Gaza. Basically says that he'll end it without giving any details about how. Again, it's a big theme of the interview. No details, just saying, I'm going to fix everything. Everyone else, the Biden administration has been doing a terrible job. The Democrats have been doing a terrible job. I'll come in and do a great job. I did a great job when I was president. And then the other thing I want to mention is crime, just because the interviewer starts to ask a question about crime, doesn't even get the full question out, and mentions how homicides are down significantly from 2023 or from 2022 to 2023. Trump interrupts his question and says, no, those are fake numbers. And the interviewer's like, no, actually the FBI put these numbers together with help from local police departments that you've often praised during your presidency and afterwards. And Trump's like, no, the FBI made up those numbers. I'm not criticizing the police departments, but the FBI faked those numbers. And then Trump says this. He says, there is no way that crime went down over the last year. There's no way because you have migrant crime. Are they adding migrant crime? Or do they consider that a different form of crime? And that killed me.
That killed me. That's so good.
Him trying to make migrant crime a thing is hilarious to me. That is the most fake news. Like, we live in a different reality thing that I can possibly imagine. No, it is not a different form of crime. No, migrant crime is not a fucking thing. And yes, migrants commit less crimes than native-born Americans.
Yes, which is something we need to say every time they talk about migrant crime, because migrants commit less crime. You're safer living in a migrant-only community than an all-American community.
Yes.
That's just the truth,
That
guys.
is the truth.
That's the truth.
And there is no different type of crime that migrants are committing. They're not committing violent crime more often. They're not fucking flaying people while they walk around the street. It's ridiculous.
No, homicide rates are now where they were in the 2005 level.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. It's not as good as the 2012 level, but it's down to where it was in 2005. Between 2000 and 2007, that's where we are with the crime homicide rate.
Yeah. And I mean, it spiked because of COVID, because economic distress creates a situation for people to commit a lot of crime. And that's something else that we can probably talk about in another episode. But yeah, migrant crime is a funny, ridiculous idea.
Thank you for watching this episode of Out of Order.
I can't believe you made it to the end.
If you like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you really like us, check us out on Patreon.
This week, one of our videos is about Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and his tours to China and the Middle East.
Our other video is talking about Biden's new regulations in school meals about sugar and sodium content.
And then this week, we did a deep dive into why the U.S. and European economies are diverging so much.
Thanks, guys. See you on the next episode.